The high desert of New Mexico was a place where the sun didn't just shine. It scorched the earth until the horizon vibrated with heat. In the middle of this desolate landscape sat the Black Mesa Ranch, a sprawling 10,000-acre estate that officially served as a private retreat and tactical training ground for Vanguard Solutions, one of the most powerful private military contractors in the United States. To the outside world, it was a legitimate business helping to train law enforcement and high-end security details. But the locals in the nearby town of Dusty Creek knew better. They saw the convoys of blacked-out SUVs moving at midnight, heard the muffled explosions from the canyon floors, and noticed the way the town's young men were being recruited and then never seen again. Into this world of dust and secrets arrived a woman named Elena. She drove a rusted 1978 Chevy pickup and carried a toolbox that had seen better decades. She had taken a job as a fleet mechanic, a position that involved fixing the rugged off-road vehicles that the Vanguard operators beat to pieces in the desert. Elena was a person who took up very little space. She wore grease-stained coveralls, kept her hair tucked under a baseball cap, and rarely spoke more than 3 words at a time. To the operators at Black Mesa, men who prided themselves on their gym-built muscles and expensive tactical gear, she was a grease monkey, a nobody who existed only to ensure their engines roared on command. The head of security at the ranch was a man named Colonel Garrett Thorne, a disgraced former officer who had traded his honor for a massive paycheck from Vanguard's mysterious board of directors. Thorne and his lead enforcer, a sadistic man named Sledge, made it a habit to humiliate the support staff. They would dump sand into the engines Elena had just cleaned or intentionally snap parts just to watch her work overtime in the sweltering heat of the garage. They thought she was just another desperate soul with nowhere else to go. What they didn't know was that Elena was actually Captain Elena Ghost Cross, a Tier 1 operator from the most elite, unacknowledged unit in the U.S. Joint Special Operations Command. She was a legend in the world of unconventional warfare, a woman who had dismantled terror cells in 4 different continents without ever leaving a footprint. She wasn't at Black Mesa for a paycheck. She was there because a high-ranking U.S. senator's son had vanished after joining Vanguard, and intelligence suggested the ranch was being used as a staging ground for a domestic coup. Elena's mission was to infiltrate, observe, and gather the digital evidence needed to authorize a full military strike on the facility. For 6 weeks, she had played the role of the humble mechanic, her hands covered in oil while her mind mapped the exact placement of every motion sensor, guard post, and encrypted server in the compound. The atmosphere at Black Mesa began to shift during the 2nd month. The training drills became more aggressive, and the ranch began to receive shipments of heavy weaponry that had no business being in a private security facility: anti-tank missiles, high-grade explosives, and experimental jamming technology. Elena watched from the shadows of her garage as Thorne and Sledge oversaw the arrival of the Silver Legion, a group of radicalized former soldiers who were being groomed for a strike on the state capitol. Elena knew her time was running out. She had been using a miniature signal interceptor hidden inside an old alternator to bleed data from the ranch's main server, but the encryption was getting tighter. She needed physical access to the sanctum, Thorne's private underground office located beneath the main lodge. The breaking point arrived on a Friday evening. A young local boy named Toby, who worked as a kitchen hand at the ranch, accidentally stumbled upon a meeting between Thorne and a group of unidentified foreign investors. Sledge had caught the boy and dragged him into the center of the courtyard, intending to make an example of him in front of the assembled staff. The operators gathered around, cheering as Sledge prepared to use a tactical whip on the terrified teenager. Elena stood at the edge of the crowd, her face a mask of indifference, but her heart was a cold engine of rage. She saw the fear in Toby's eyes, the same fear she had seen in the eyes of countless victims across the globe. She knew that if she intervened, her cover was blown. But she also knew that a soldier's first duty was to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Sledge raised the whip, his face twisted in a cruel grin. Before it could fall, a heavy iron wrench flew through the air with the speed of a bullet, striking Sledge squarely in the wrist. The whip dropped to the dust as Sledge let out a howl of pain. The crowd went silent. Every eye turned to the garage, where Elena was walking slowly into the courtyard, wiping her hands on a grease rag. Her nobody persona had vanished, replaced by a terrifying, silent authority. Thorn stepped forward, his hand on his sidearm, demanding to know what the grease monkey thought she was doing. Elena didn't answer with words. She looked at Thorn with the eyes of a predator that had finally decided to stop playing with its food. She told the boy to run, and for some reason, the guards were too stunned by the change in her aura to stop him. Thorn, feeling his ego bruised in front of his men, ordered Sledge and 3 other operators to teach the mechanic a lesson. He told them to break every bone in her body, but to keep her alive so he could question her. Sledge, cradling his broken wrist, lunged at her with a combat knife. What happened next was a blur of movement that the human eye could barely track. Elena didn't just fight, she disassembled them. She used Sledge's own momentum to send him crashing into a concrete pillar, then pivoted to deliver a series of strikes to the other guards that were as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. In less than 10 seconds, 4 of the ranch's elite security team were unconscious or screaming in the dirt. Elena looked at Thorn and told him, in a voice as cold as a desert night, that his little army was a joke. The ranch went into full lockdown. Thorn, realizing that he wasn't dealing with a mechanic but a professional assassin, triggered the extermination protocol. He ordered his 50 armed operators to hunt her down and kill her on sight. Elena retreated into the darkness of the fleet garage, but she wasn't hiding. She was preparing. She reached into a hidden compartment beneath the garage's concrete floor and pulled out a tactical vest, a suppressed 416 Hong Kong dollars rifle, and a belt of specialized grenades. She had spent weeks fixing the facility's vehicles, but she had actually been sabotaging them. As the first team of operators tried to start their SUVs to pursue her, the engines didn't roar. They exploded, the specialized thermite charges she had planted melting the blocks into scrap metal. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. Elena used the sprawling ranch like a chessboard. She knew the blind spots of every camera and the frequency of every radio. She moved through the scrub brush and the shadows of the outbuildings like a literal ghost. She didn't engage in long firefights. She took them out one by one, 2 by 2. To the vanguard operators, it felt like the desert itself was attacking them. A guard would disappear from his post with only a muffled thud. A patrol would walk into a cloud of flashbangs and wake-up hours. Later in zip ties, Elena was systematic, ruthless, and terrifyingly efficient. She was dismantling Thorn's power structure from the bottom up. She reached the main lodge by midnight. The building was a fortress, guarded by Thorn's remaining inner circle. Elena used a customized drone to drop the ranch's power grid, plunging the estate into total darkness. In the blackness, she was invincible. She had high-end thermal goggles, while the guards were left fumbling for flashlights. She breached the lodge through a second-story balcony, moving through the luxurious hallways like a shadow. She wasn't just there to fight. She was there for the data. She reached the sanctum, Thorn's underground lair, and found the server hub. As she initiated the final data transfer to the Pentagon, the door hissed open. Thorn was there, holding a heavy machine gun, his face pale with a mixture of fear and fury. Thorn began to scream about how he had built this empire, how nobodies like her were supposed to stay in the gutter. He opened fire, the heavy rounds tearing through the expensive furniture and the server racks. Elena moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy physics, using the concrete support beams for cover. She didn't want to kill him yet. She wanted him to see his world crumble. She used a series of smoke grenades to disorient him, then closed the distance in a heartbeat. The hand-to-hand struggle that followed was brief but brutal. Thorn was a trained soldier, but Elena was something more. She was the result of 1,000,000 hours of training and a heart that couldn't be broken. She disarmed him, pinned him to his own desk, and watched as the progress bar on the server hit 100%. "The data is out, Thorn," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the sirens. "The FBI, the National Guard, and your former bosses, everyone knows. You're not a colonel anymore. You're just a convict." Thorn collapsed, the weight of his defeat finally crushing him. Outside, the horizon was lit up by the lights of dozens of military helicopters. The cavalry had finally arrived, but the battle was already over. Elena didn't stay to be thanked. She grabbed her toolbox, which now contained the master drive, and slipped out through a hidden drainage tunnel she had mapped out on her first day. As the sun began to rise over the New Mexico desert, the Black Mesa Ranch was swarmed by hundreds of federal agents. The Silver Legion was arrested before they could ever strike, and the corrupt senator was taken into custody in D.C. within the hour. The town of Dusty Creek woke up to a world where the Black Castle on the hill was finally silent. They watched as the black SUVs were towed away and the arrogant operators were let off in handcuffs. They asked about the mechanic who had started it all, but no one could find her. The rusted Chevy pickup was gone, and the garage was empty. Elena was miles away, driving through the cooling desert air. She had changed back into her flannel shirt and cap, the grease once again on her hands to hide the calluses of combat. She pulled over at a small truck stop, bought a cup of black coffee, and looked at the map. She had a new name, a new identity, and a new location already waiting for her. She was heading to a shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia, where a different kind of corruption was growing. To the people in that truck stop, she was just another traveler, another quiet woman passing through. She liked it. That way, she knew that as long as the powerful thought they could hide in the shadows, she would be there, waiting to show them that the shadows belonged to her. The legend of the mechanic of Black Mesa would be whispered in military bars and intelligence offices for years to come. They would talk about the woman who took down a private army with a wrench and a rifle. But for Elena, it was just another day on the job. She didn't need the medals, and she didn't want the fame. She just wanted the engines to run smooth and the world to be a little bit more. Just as she pulled back onto the highway, the desert sun finally cresting the mountains, the nobody was already moving toward the next fight. The war for the soul of the country was a long one. But as long as Elena Cross was in the shadows, the nobodies would always have a champion. Across the state line, the morning news was filled with images of the ranch. The reporters called it a miraculous intelligence-led operation, never mentioning the woman in the grease-stained coveralls. Elena smiled faintly as she listened to the radio. She didn't mind that they took the credit. In fact, it was better that way. A ghost is most effective when no one believes in it. She adjusted her cap, took a sip of her coffee, and pushed the pedal to the floor. The road ahead was long, but Elena Cross had plenty of fuel and a heart full of fire. The mechanic was gone, but the ghost was just getting started, and the world was about to find out that the most dangerous person is always the one you never see coming.